7 horns and 7 eyes. Yeah. What I wrote in my booklet was above the 7 horns, omnipotence, all power. So in the 7 eyes, omniscience, all knowledge. And so to me, these are attributes of the Lamb who has, and it's funny because he was a lion at first, and John turns around and the lion now is a lamb, which does a slain lamb, which is not exactly a picture of power. And this is what I love about Jesus is he is both. He's master of the entire universe. He has 7 horns and 7 eyes, but he is also he is love because God is love. And so the way that he conquers the world is through the cross, is through being a sacrificed lamb. And I don't think there are any other religions that have that combination. It seems like it's pretty much just all power. We don't see, and so Christianity is always the followership of Jesus has always been foolishness to the Greeks and an offense to the Jews, because it makes no sense for the God of the entire world to have died on a cross.
Or even the incarnation. Greeks were very into this idea of dualism, which is this idea that there's spirit and flesh is bad, spirit is good. So the entire idea that God, who is great, would be incarnate in flesh is a weird idea to Greeks. They'd be like, well, why would that be a good idea?
Yeah, if he's flesh, he's less than, kind of thing. So anyway, that's how I take those images. They're representative of the power and the
So in this case, even
Jesus.
the specific reference is Revelation 5:6, and the Lamb is standing as if it had been slaughtered, having 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God sent out into all the earth. So the idea is the spirit is for authority and awareness. The spirits have been sent out into all the earth. So in this case, it specifically tells you what they represent.
It's a sandwich. We have a lion. We have a slaughtered lamb, and then we have the slaughtered lamb has 7 horns and 7 eyes. So it's strength, weakness, strength again.
Sort of a metaphorical sandwich, not a literal sandwich, because
we
talk about food in week 7.
I don't eat it until after class.
That's why.
It's a really good sandwich. All right.
We are actually having shepherd's pie tonight with dinner, if anybody is on YouTube.
How's the food, by the way? Is it okay?
It's quite excellent shepherd's pie.
All right.
The part that I was wondering about is chapter 10, verse 7. The mystery of God will be accomplished. And that's just a little portion of that. The whole verse is, but in the days when the 7th angel is about to sound his trumpet, the mystery of God will be accomplished. So, I don't know. Yeah, what is the mystery of God to be accomplished?
Yep. Let's. I'm going to overview this whole section. So remind me when I get to that part to answer that.
The question was about what's the mystery of God in Revelation 10, and the answer is we're going to talk about it.
Yeah. Because it's a good question. Okay. Any other questions about the last couple sections? Stuff that you've been thinking about. Okay.
And we should also make the disclaimer: the weird section is weird, right? So we also were stumbling through this, wondering what it all means. Alex and I have been teaching the class, just kind of agreed to stumble through it slightly ahead. But it's a hard book, right? It's dense and it's full of allegory and symbolism and cross references, and probably inside jokes in there somewhere too. But it's a hard text to get through, and it's the whole which? Oh yeah, the beasts alone are weird.
That fun is coming. In a couple of weeks.
And it only gets weirder from here.
It does. So
we at some point lose the 7 of Sevens narrative and go into more of just a story of telling one aspect of the conflict that's raging. And it's okay to just own that and admit it. And it's like, wow, this is a really hard book to get through.
Yeah.
Yeah, the comment is that it's an allegory like The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is an allegory as well. That way, the symbolism is a little shallower in that one, but yeah, same idea.
Yeah, it's written in the 20th century.
Yeah, that's true. Also, the cultural context it was written in is way more similar to our own.
But he certainly uses New Testament metaphors. So it's kind of a 20th century metaphorical interpretation of.
So
of
one thing
first
also,
century.
one thing just super briefly, one of the things you may be asking is, well, why all of the allegory and why all the symbolism? God is trying to explain a reality that has no physical manifestation. God's a spirit. There's no physical throne room. There's no physical spirits. There's no physical angels. And so the only thing he has that's common with John's story is the Old Testament, the imagery in the Old Testament. This is how God has always spoken through prophets. Prophecy is in some sense a very visual way of communicating with God. And he has to do this because none of this stuff actually exists, right? I mean, it exists as a force of life, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't physically exist, right? And so one of the things that is true about a prophetic experience is it has to be intermediated through something that a human can relate to, because to see it from God's true perspective, you would have no basis of assembling that. Your brain couldn't work out what it was all about.
Yeah, which is another way of saying don't hold on extremely tightly to the images as being physical, literal things. You can. I think if you do that, then you're more apt to say it's all for a future age, because we can't envision that happening in our present world. If the sky is going to roll up like a scroll, that can't apply to today because the sky hasn't done that yet. But if it's a metaphor, then you're open to the option of saying, okay, on some level that is happening today. Is that concept hard? Not like hard to understand, but is that a frustrating or difficult concept to hear?
Take somebody from the 1900s and plop them down in the middle of Longmont and show them around. They're going to be like looking, reading the Bible, because basically the same thing, because everything is like, this is not real. This can't be happening.
Yeah.
It's magic.
It's almost like science fiction. Like you're in the future and everything looks different and people have fun in envisioning.
Here, this stuff could be normal.
Yeah. Okay, so what you're saying is with the change of technology, these images could actually, yeah, and that's a very common view, that this stuff doesn't make sense now, but it will at some point. One of the points we're making is it also had to make sense to the first readers. So that's the rule of interpreting Scripture, is we're listening into John's conversation to primarily these 7 churches. And so if these images have to do with future technology, then we have to throw that out. This wasn't meaningful for them. They just got to carry it until the day it becomes meaningful.
And it's not that isn't also possibly correct. It's that the main and the plain meaning to those whom it was written, we know that has a meaning, right? The other stuff is certainly possible and certainly open to a lot of interpretation. And it isn't that we want to discount that. It's that this is the stuff we can make progress on, is like, well, what did it mean to them? Oftentimes prophecy has many meanings, right? The virgin with child in Isaiah was literally a baby that was being born in current events, right? And then it has another meaning way, way later.
Yeah.
Right. So that's very common in
recognize
prophecy.
That these things can be fulfilled in ways that will be incredible, and they are in the future, the final fulfillment. So yeah, but we just can't bypass. Like if you read Isaiah 7, a virgin will conceive. That is literally fulfilled in chapter 8 of Isaiah. And they're like, well, wait a minute, did a virgin give birth to a baby in chapter 8? Well, the word virgin can mean young maiden or virgin. So that's a weird one. So that one had an immediate fulfillment. It was Isaiah gave a word to King Ahaz, and it was fulfilled in the next chapter about a current set of problems. And then the New Testament writers come and say, okay, that prophecy spoke first to this little mountain. It's almost like if you're in the Great Smokies or the Appalachians and you're looking at sunset and you can see layer after layer of mountains. And way in the back, you can barely see this huge mountain. It's just distant. And the New Testament writers come and say that not only was a word about Isaiah's child, but that was also a word about a literal virgin, not just a young maiden, giving birth to God. And that's the big mountain in the background. And now the New Testament is interpreting that and saying, here's what this actually meant. The New Testament does that constantly. This is what was happening there, but here's what it actually meant. And so the New Testament has permission to do that because these are people inspired. This is Jesus and inspired people. And so now we're trying to do that. We're trying to do the same thing. But the problem is the fulfillment is we don't know it yet. As it happens, and a lot of us do that. This is actually referring to Hal Lindsey, the European Economic Union, the 10 horns. Once we get
is that what that means? Cool.
Once we get to the 10th horn, then we're done. And maybe you do need a table.
I guess I did. I don't know.
But we got to 10, and then we got to 11, and we got to 12, and then Hal Lindsey's scratching his head, and he wrote a new book. Right? Okay, well, here's where I got it wrong. And so you just have to, you don't want to bypass what the first hearers heard before you say what could be the possible ultimate fulfillments of these things.
And Jesus models that too, in the sense that his culture is obviously much closer to the culture to whom the original prophecies were written. And he would have been grounded in this study of what it meant immediately. And it's only looking back at that you look and go, oh, of course. David does this constantly in the Psalms, right? David's writing about what's happening to him immediately that day, right? These are very current events for David. He's not thinking about somebody getting crucified. Crucifixion hadn't even been invented when David was alive, right?
And yet here he is.
And yet here he is describing
graphically describing.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I always wonder what's going on in their heads when they're doing messianic prophecies.
I think they're just trying to make a rhyme. I mean, what do songwriters always do? You get in the spirit, you get in the groove, and you're like, oh, that rhymes.
And they're
cool.
feeling something. And they're like, this is what I'm seeing and feeling. And this. And David, like the 22nd Psalm, this is how I feel right now. I feel like I'm being encircled by bulls. They're puncturing my hands and my feet. Wild dogs are around me. They're gambling for my clothes. Yep. And he's just like, man, that was such a...
And I feel abandoned by God.
Yeah, oh God, why have you forsaken me? And he's just like spilling this out. And I think for, 1,000 years, people are reading David going, man, that guy was really, he's being very dramatic about his hard time. And then now, 3,000 years after we wrote it, we read the 22nd Psalm and we just say, oh my God.
Literally, oh my God.
And now we're seeing the crucifixion of Jesus through Jesus' eyes, written by David.
The thing to keep in mind is not that we want to discount the big future meaning. It's that the heart of God is revealed in both the big future meaning and also the present, because the heart of God is constant, right? It's the same today, yesterday, today, no shadow of changing, right? And so if we can understand the little meaning and zoom in what God was trying to tell them, that's a good thing, and that we can make progress on without worrying too much about what it eventually means. And it isn't so much, I don't want to discount anybody trying to fit this into a broader literalist narrative. That's a very natural thing to do, and it's a legitimate thing. It's a completely legitimate field of inquiry. I want to understand what it meant to these people, because it's the same God speaking through both an immediate meaning and a later meaning. Immediately. The question is, how soon in church history were people writing commentaries on what this all meant? Weeks.
They were.
This has been a hotly debated topic for literally as long as there have been Christians. Since before they were called Christians, they were called followers of the way at the time.
Yeah. The four views that we outline in the intro follow the chronology of how Christians interpreted it predominantly during that time period. Mm-hmm. Where did those early commentaries from? They were historical premillennialists, which basically means they interpreted the images as symbols, kind of like we're presenting it. But once you got to chapter 20, they believed in a literal 1,000 years. And so all of this stuff is metaphorical imagery to make a point. And of course, they understood what the 7 hills that they understood that they were talking about Rome, because they were still right there. Etc. But they believed that all of this stuff would come to a stop, and everything would change during the millennium. And then after the millennium, just historical Jesus would come back, and then the millennium, the 1,000 years would happen. And that's what people for the first 500 years, by and large, understood it. And so it's kind of like, well, then why are we changing the view? Why don't we just stick with what the early people had? I don't really have a good answer to that question.
Yeah, so the comment is, well, clearly more than 1,000 years have passed,
Well,
smart guy.
They didn't know how long it would be once they got to the millennium. So they really they thought it could have been. I don't think anybody thought we would be sitting here talking about this in the year 2023.
And again, 1,000 years does not literally mean 1,000 years. It means a long time.
Well, it does.
Right?
It does to half of the interpreters.
Unless you're
Revelation.
in the literalist.
It does to the
I'm
initial
revealing
view, and then the current most popular view.
I'm
in
revealing my
America.
priors here.
The
Sorry.
in-betweeners
You're right.
view the 1,000 years. So this is just illustrating the point that none of us know what we're talking about.
So do you think that the early Christians, early followers, since they were closer to the writing and had much better context, do you think they had it more correct than anything since?
The question is, did the early church get it more right than we do because they were much closer to the context? Quite possibly.
But you can use the same argument to say, why aren't we still all Catholic? Or why aren't we all still Orthodox?
Well, technically, we'd be something between Catholic and Orthodox and Coptic.
Yeah.
Catholic didn't come about until the 400s.
Well, that's what we say.
That we've divulged into a debate on early church history
Yeah.
and labeling.
Constantinople did his deal, it became not what it was.
Well, I agree with you. I think Catholicism, as we now know it, began to look like something like it currently does around 600 A.D. But and everybody wants to be restorationist, which means let's be like the early church. Let's try to be like them. And of course, for us, talking about what the early church was hearing is a form of restoration.
They were talking about what it meant to them, though, so that's also quite correct to talk about what it means to us immediately. The Apostle Paul had also pretty clearly left a mandate not to camp out on your rooftop looking for the sky to fall. What he says, what? I did not go, so the comment is no prepping. I did not go there, just for the record.
I don't even know what you guys are talking about.
There's a difference between prepping and being prepared.
We will talk about doomsday prepping on week 8 for your end of the world
Okay.
moment. So it is coming.
Yeah.
We can't not talk about it
But
at some level.
even
But
Paul said, don't worry about it now because the man of lawlessness hasn't been revealed. So that's not all that helpful because it's like, well, who's he and when does he come?
I thought we were going to talk about suffering
All right,
and the
let's move
redemptive
on.
power of suffering in the text. So it shows you what I know.
Yeah, you're right. Okay, so any other big picture questions? These are the things that we need to talk about because this is stuff that we're wrestling with. And
The question is great, though. The idea that prophecy can mean a bunch of stuff, it means you should still poke into it because the things that you can make progress on are what it meant in that context. And that also reveals the heart of God. That also tells you what God was thinking about how he told these people what he needed to tell them, right? So
okay.
that's also useful.
I'll just say that when I first got into it, I embraced the first century view. And then, like the church at around 600 years, I then thought, I actually like this other view a little bit better. And then the rest of the world moved on without me, apparently. So, all right. So, chapter 8. You ready? So the seals have just ended. The 7th seal has just opened up, and now the 7th seal opens with what we're calling the next section. And I'm going to read at the top of page 13, chapter 8, verse 1. When he opened the 7th seal, there was silence in heaven for about half an hour. Now, let's talk about that. Huh? Yeah,
A whole half an hour, 30 minutes.
half an hour.
Now, is that 30 minutes, or is that?
No,
Yeah,
it's-
the comment is that literally 30 minutes? Or
Yeah.
Explain that one, smart guys.
Yeah, I think it was. I think John sat there for half an hour waiting for the next thing to happen. So yeah, I'm being a literalist at this point. Well, according to they had a way of telling time back then too, somehow. So
It also says about half an hour. So
Yeah, there you go. So I envision John's watch. He sees the seventh seal open, and he's just like, "Here we go, final one," and then nothing. And now half an hour doesn't seem like a very long time, especially when we're talking about 3.5 years.
he's literally just seen a giant multitude standing that no one can count standing before the throne of God.
Yeah.
So things have been ramping up in excitement quite a bit.
Yeah.
And now,
And they're singing.
yeah, they're singing and now
He
nothing.
sees the
and
final
he's
thing,
like,
and he's
there's
just
there's
like-
trumpet distribution is what's happening,
Yeah,
but
maybe they took a half an hour for him to like get so his heart could slow down. Okay.
or so he yeah,
Yeah.
the comment is or so he could write stuff
He's
down.
like, it's only been 25 minutes. I need 5 more minutes to write about the
Hang
multitude.
on, I'm out of papyrus.
Yeah. So who knows? I think, and of course, I'm reading this week. I did more rereading than usual because this section throws me.
It's hard. It's a hard section.
But I think it was a pregnant pause because we're starting over again, and what's about to happen is pretty serious. It's like terrifying. So I think it's sort of the hesitation is sort of, we haven't had the hesitation since we waited for somebody to open the seals. That was more of like, it wasn't quiet for half an hour, but it was just like, who's going to do this? So it's silent for half an hour. And then here's what happens. I saw 7 angels who stand before God, and 7 trumpets were given to them. So, and another angel who had a golden censer came, stood at the altar. This is very serious stuff. He was given much incense to offer with the prayers of all of God's people on the golden altar in front of the throne. Smoke of incense together with the prayers of God's people went up before God from the angel's hands. So the angel is bringing prayers of God's people. And so one of the questions I have is that just all the people prior? Or is this all the people of all time? In other words, are Nancy's prayers and our text prayer team's prayers part of what this angel is offering up? And of course, I think it is. And I think these things are universal. But so the prayers of God's people come up before God from the angel's hand, and then he takes the censer, he filled it with fire from the altar. And of course, the temple and the tabernacle both had an altar there with fire in it. And he takes the stuff and he hurls it on the earth. And this is not a light, fun little thing. There came peals of thunder, rumblings, flashes of lightning, and an earthquake. So he sees, after all the silence, the result of the prayers is the angel reaches into the fire on the altar and flings it on the earth, and all this incredible noise happens. And that is descriptive of the 7 trumpets. They each put the trumpet to their lips and they blow. And now I'm going to synopsize. The first trumpet kills a third. Each of them kill a third of something. This one kills a third of the foliage. And the second trumpet, verse 8 through 9, destroys a third of the sea, including all the creatures in the sea and all sailors and ships. The third trumpet destroys a third of all the fresh water. So we've gone from salt water to fresh water. And then it goes into a great description about how not having fresh water is so hard for people. The fourth trumpet now goes to stuff in the sky. And it almost seems to be a transition where a third of stuff in the sky goes dark, including nighttime. A third of the night goes dark, which is exactly.
No stars. The question is, how does that work? And the answer is no stars.
Okay. Well done. Yeah.
Possibly all the streetlights go out, yes.
Your cell phone flashlight no longer works. Yes. Yeah, one
Yes,
third of
only
your
a
cell
third
phone
of your
no
cell
longer
phone.
works.
There you go.
And honestly, these kind of things tell me, okay, is this literal or is this a powerful metaphor of what's happening? I mean,
This would.
a
Can I
third
make
of
a-
stuff is getting destroyed.
Can I make a point? This would suck to live through, right? This is going to be bad. So, yeah, the comment is all hell is about to break loose, and yeah, pretty much.
Well, and what if this is descriptive of disasters throughout time? So, like, when the Titanic hits an iceberg, then that's part of the fulfillment of the second trumpet. Or when,
A third of the population pass away and all the wars of men.
That's exactly. Those are the kind of questions you ask, or will they by the time we get to the end? Yeah.
So one thing we should also point out is even though the trumpets announce stuff, there's an implicit assumption we're all making in the textual interpretation that the trumpets cause this stuff. And that may not be the case, but it probably is the case the way the text is reading, but that may also not be the case. I don't know.
Well, let's go there now.
So-
Because
Okay.
Section where the trumpet starts that.
Or may announce. Yeah. The question is, is that a section where the trumpet starts it? It may announce it too. Trumpets are also for announcing stuff.
yeah,
Yeah.
well, and that's the big question: is God making this happen? Because the fire does come from the altar in front of.
But that just has peals of thunder and lightnings and an earthquake.
Okay, it's
but
not
it
the
doesn't
trumpet.
specifically tie the horrible destruction that
Well
comes
done.
later.
Well, so this is good because, and I'll finish the synopsis here in just a second. But here's the big question for us about God and about the book of Revelation. And the question is, if God is love, and the scriptures say that He is, then why is He the one that's killing a third of everything? Or is it more like the horsemen, where it's more describing the history of mankind in the world? And if we view, as most people view Revelation as God is just ravaging the earth, then that is a tough perception of who God is. And
Very evangelistic.
well, yeah, unless people really like that kind of thing. Serena.
It's confusing to me because he says in the book that the angels are pastors or bishops or leaders, and now they're angels.
Yeah. Angels are used to speak of God Himself. Like the angel of the Lord in Exodus 3 is actually the Lord. Or three angels visiting Abraham are actually, we think, are the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Angels, one way to interpret is as pastors, messengers in chapter 1. So angels generically just means messenger. Yeah. But these ones seem to be more spiritual in nature and harder to interpret as other things. And we know they're not God. Or, well, maybe, I guess that's sort of the question too. Are each of these angels an expression of God? Later on in the fifth trumpet, we start seeing a bad angel.
Can I interject? There's a thing that happens in Revelation 8, verse 13. The eagle is having the same reaction we're all having. Whoa, 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 whoa. This is terrible, right? So there's things also coming out of this experience of God that are also having the same emotional reaction we're all having, which is, wow, that seems really heavy.
As opposed to, isn't God cool?
That's
that
awesome.
he's-
This is
that
great.
He's destroying the earth.
Okay, so this is out there probably. But if angels are
The whole it'd be par for the course. Yeah.
so angels being messengers, maybe this is all metaphor for the message that the angels are giving. You guys all going to repent, you're all going to burn, you're all going to
Yeah.
repent, and the third one ignore the angels and are going to.
Yeah. That's interesting.
The comment is, if the angels are just messengers, maybe they're a metaphor for the message itself. I think, is that fair?
And the
Not quite.
third, the result of the messengers is a result of people's negative reaction.
To the message.
Yeah.
So maybe the angels are simply bringing the message, and that's the response people are giving, therefore, their end result.
But they couldn't be the devil's angels. I know it says
Well-
that it was before God, but
They in the fifth one. Once we get to the woes that the eagle.
The
freaked
question
out
is,
about,
we should repeat the question is, could they be the devil's angels, or are they?
yeah.
The answer is, I don't know. Probably
Well,
not.
my answer is I think they start becoming that now. Yeah, because the fifth trumpet, which now they're going to go into three woes. So it's like woe, and woe is not just like whoa, dude. It's just like this is bad. Like Jesus' woes to the Pharisees were pretty bad. And so in the fifth trumpet, which is the first woe, an abyss is opened up, and this angel opens up this abyss, and a bunch of smoke and crazy locusts come out of it. This like countless horde of locusts, like an army, that the dark angel is the head of, and they give him his name, Destroyer, both in Greek and in Aramaic, I think. And they torture everyone who doesn't have the mark. Now, in this case, the mark has already been given by an angel for God's people. So now we have these demons who are tormenting people who they're not killing them, they're just torturing them. That's a relief. But they're tormenting the unmarked people, and they do it for 5 months.
Which is still awful.
That's a long
Right.
time to be tormented.
Well, and it's
I'd take a half an
even if
hour
it's
over
not the
5
people
months.
of God, it's still pretty awful, right?
Yeah. The idea here is that this bad stuff is happening in order to give people a chance to repent. Now let's zoom back for a minute, because that's just like, well, God's kind of intense. But if you're like me, you tend to be much more responsive to getting help from God when you feel helpless. Or if you get sick, or if you have an injury and you're suffering, then what you currently have is not enough. It's no longer enough. And I think the idea, and I think God does this, I think God allows hardship in order to get us to respond to the solution, because he always brings salve and healing when we're hurting. And I think that the angels, the purpose of these guys, the third, is to soften up people for a chance to connect. Because if you're not thirsty, then you're less apt to look for water.
What happens to the gift that is demanded is no gift at all? Isn't this no love demanded?
I think that's a good question for God. Because
We should repeat the question.
yeah, what happened to a gift? And of course, you're not quoting scripture, but a gift that's demanded is not a gift. It's forced from people, and
The commandment to repent is a command, right? The gift is free, but the command to repent is a command.
and we have the option of responding to it or not.
Yeah.
It's the kindness that leads to repentance. But to me, you're asking a bigger question: is what's the purpose of suffering in the world? And to me, that's the question of chapters 8 through 11. And it's a question we all have to ask. And we may or may not have good answers to it.
So 9:5 says they were not allowed to kill them,
Correct.
only to make them suffer for 5 months. So is that merciful? I mean, is that in some way positive because they're not totally defeated?
I think it is. One of the things we see in this section of the book is constantly things that are bad get downscoped. God says, do this, but don't do that, right? There's a constant reeling in of the bad to say, you can go that far, but no further. So there's still the common grace and protection of God is still very much operating in this passage.
Very much like Job.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Job is an offensive book because we have God giving the devil permission to do stuff, but he's limiting what he can do. And it's a book about suffering and a book about how God actually cares enough to interact with Job at the end.
Well, God does not answer all of Job's questions, but he does interact with him.
Julie.
So.
Good. Yeah.
Yeah, we actually talked about in the podcast recording we did yesterday about how this section very much calls out themes from the book of Job about awful things happening effectively to people that are, not really deserving of them. One of the things you got to realize in this passage is there's still believers on earth, right? The locusts don't affect them, but man, the other 4 things do, right? So it's not a fun time to live through.
Well, some people would say that no, the rapture has happened before
Some
this,
people would say that too.
because God
but-
would never let believers suffer, right? And so I don't think any of us are actually believers because we sure seem to suffer a lot. Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
The comment is the point of the
whether
tribulation
it's a
is to
future
give people.
tribulation or whether this is a theme throughout the entire.
I think that's a theme of everything. The point of tribulation is always to try and get people to turn around and turn to God. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah, it's up to us. And so to me, these are the big picture questions. What role is God playing in allowing or causing suffering? And what's the purpose of suffering?
Yeah, I mean, one of the ways to think about this is suffering is always a tool of God. And it looks like God has gotten out the really sharp tools, right? I mean, this is like suffering, extra suffering. And, there's suffering happens to people that don't deserve it. That's a thing that just happens in the world. I mean, the believers are getting persecuted for this stuff. I mean, Jesus tells them in chapter 1 of this book, some of you are going to die. You should get ready for that. I mean, there's sufferings all over. They didn't deserve to die for what they believe, but it was coming for them anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm always blown away by how, if I'm having a hard day, how much more tender God seems to be the next day.
We should mention that the conjugate of this is don't go looking for suffering or causing it on purpose. So you can get close to God even without the big pain megaphone, as C.S. Lewis called it. Like, it's... Yes, humanity may have brought it on ourselves, but we should still not sort of kind of wish for it. And Jesus takes this position in Matthew when he talks about it. He's like, this is going to get rough. Like, pray that it doesn't happen in winter, which seems an odd thing to say, right? So the attitude of God is clearly not, I'm going to really enjoy this. It's clearly, I'm not really going to enjoy this, right? I mean, God is picking up these tools of suffering, trying to...
To me, it's like a parent disciplining their child.
Could be like that.
Sort of, this will hurt me more than...
Certainly that analogy has been used before.
Yeah.
I think it's more man than the government. God has allowed us to be who we want to be and choose what we want to choose.
Yeah.
This evil is not God. This is the devil. This is the Antichrist.
So you would say that it's more about God working all things together for good. Like we're killing each other, and God's allowing the suffering to in order to come back to Him.
So that somebody, the people left behind, have a second chance. You know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Also be just free will. Because a man has free will, but God doesn't make our decisions for us. We make the decision.
Yes.
So could this not be a punishment for us taking and fighting for our free will and doing it wrong?
There are lots of things it could be, and this is why this is a hard book. This book makes you go face to face with. I'm sure there are people on here experiencing this stuff that don't deserve it. Like, not like this,
Right.
right?
Melissa,
And-
I would just say that I'm actually with you. That God's He's not a sadist, but then you have to either ignore the text or you have to figure out how to read it, and that's what we're doing here.
And we don't want to ignore the text. Clearly, that's like bad. So,
Yeah.
right.
You're still here, so you're doing good. All right, so the sixth trumpet is the second woe. He said there was going to be 3 of them. And this one really gets bad. These 4 angels, let's see, there's an army of 200 million mounted soldier angels. And we know it's 200 million because it's 20 times 10 times 10 times 1,000, whatever. And they kill
I'm amazed
everyone.
I'm amazed he got 200 million out of Roman numerals. That's cool.
Yeah, it took the whole page. And they kill a third of people that haven't been marked by God. So, and the leftovers still aren't particularly repentant. And then part of this woe is a good angel who's a giant appears, and he's really loud. Like the entire landscape is just like, whoa. And he has attributes of the sun. He's got a rainbow coming off of him, and he really looks like a good one. And he's got these 7 thunders, which is Jenny's question. So let's talk about that real quick. So we're in, let's see here, chapter 10. So let's just read that and talk about it. Starting at verse 1, we're in the middle of page 14. I saw another mighty angel coming down from heaven. He was robed in a cloud with a rainbow above his head. His face was like the sun. His legs were like fiery pillars. A lot of similar attributes to the description of Jesus, by the way. He was holding a little scroll, which lay open in his hand. He planted his right foot on the sea, left foot in the land. And he gave a loud shout like the roar of a lion. And if he's that big, this shout is just like resonating throughout the whole landscape. When he shouted, the voices of the 7 thunders spoke. And when the seven thunders spoke, I was about to write, but I heard a voice from heaven say, seal up what the seven thunders have said. Do not write it down. And so we never get to find out what the seven thunders said.
I'm sure people have theories who also have books to sell. So.
Yeah. But something was said that he's not allowed to unseal that is yet to be revealed. And it was by this huge, cool, big angel. And then continuing to Jenny's question, then the angel I had seen standing on the sea and on the land raised his right hand to heaven, and he swore by him who lives forever and ever, who created the heavens and all that is in them, the earth, all that is in it, the sea, that all is in it. He said, there will be no more delay, but in the days when the seventh angel is about to sound his trumpet, the mystery of God will be accomplished, just as he had announced to his servants, the prophets. So basically, he's just saying that the mystery of the seventh trumpet will be revealed in soon. What?
It says the mystery of God will be accomplished. And when that does a very specific phrase, and it hints at other passages where the mystery of Christ and what he did and the resurrection and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
In Romans, Paul talks about pardoning has happened to Israel until the fullness of Gentiles has come in.
Mm-hmm.
And it's wrapped up into that. And in Ephesians, he says, in the mystery, as I wrote before, brief, by referring to this, my insight in the mystery of Christ, blah, 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 says to be specific that Gentiles are fellow heirs and members of the body.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the big part of the mystery is we are part of what God did with the Jews, and it's because of what Christ did. And that whole thing, what Christ did, is the big mystery.
Yeah, the comment is about, I'm sorry, I'm going to repeat for the video, but the comment is about mysteries and about how this phrase seems awfully specific and how do mysteries figure in, because a lot of scripture in the New Testament refers to mysteries. Also, stay tuned for our ancient culture moment.
Paul wrote his thing on the Gentiles being the mystery brought in before Revelation was written.
Mystery can also mean plan.
Okay, I got you now.
This then will be accomplished.
Yeah, a mystery.
Heart to heart until the fullness of time when all the Gentiles are brought in.
In this case, I think the best translation of mystery might be secret plan, but it isn't really a secret, right? So mysteries also have this idea of a hidden riddle, I guess, that you were initiated into. We'll talk more about this at the end of the evening.
All right. So just to finish the synopsis, and we're still on the sixth trumpet, second woe, and the giant angel has a scroll. He feeds it to the Apostle John to eat it, reminiscent of, I think, Ezekiel. Is given a scroll to eat. Tastes good. It's bitter in his stomach because God has a tough message to give to the people. And then he's sent on a mission to measure the temple.
Which is also from Ezekiel.
Yep, a lot of Ezekiel metaphors here, and delineation between the inner court and the outer court, protection for the Jewish court, not a protection for the Gentile court, and now we have my favorite part of this section, which is the two witnesses.
Oh, I thought you were going to go with the ruler, the measuring. That's always my favorite part, the measuring.
Do you want to say something about that?
So you may be wondering, why on earth is John taking time out of his busy schedule to measure a temple that doesn't actually exist physically? So the book of Ezekiel has a really long section on it where Ezekiel goes and measures the temple. And the symbolism is God is definitely going to do this thing. I've got the plans. Here are the plans, right? So it's like being shown the blueprints. In the ancient world, when you built something, oftentimes you didn't have blueprints. You had a rough plan, but you would measure out stake it out, right? And so what God is saying to John here is, I have definitely decided to do this. This is going down. Here's the plan. I'm going to give you the measuring rod, and you can see how exact the plan is. So that's why he's taking an interlude to measure stuff.
Is a repetition of Ezekiel.
It's a hearkening back to Ezekiel when God was talking about the future he had for Israel, even though the Babylonians were either right about to wipe them out or had already wiped them out. Mm-hmm. And God's saying, no, this is not the end of the story.
And in the beginning of Ezekiel, he has him mark people who are protected. And so that's happening here as well, a protection.
Ezekiel's a weird book. It's another one of those books that's just weird.
Yeah.
It's long, too.
With some stunning things.
When I at one point in my life, I read the Bible cover to cover and, did the year thing. And Ezekiel was hard to get through.
Yeah.
We're at the beginning of Revelation 11, 1 through 3. When he talks about measuring stuff.
Yep, and then we see the outer temple being trampled for basically 3.5 years, and they describe 3.5 years in 3 different ways. 42 months, half of the full time. We see 2 witnesses prophesying with great effect, fire coming out of their mouths, and for 3.5. For 1,260 days, same time frame. 42 months is the same as 1,260. And then
we should also mention the witnesses have, in this case, it's very clear that the witnesses are causing the plagues and causing the devastation. So in this, the narrative shifts from a thing that happens that God's announcing or kind of allowing to something that's actively being caused by an agent of God, right? So we should own that and just remark that that's,
okay.
we've shifted that narrative here at this point.
And the idea of the 2 witnesses is also prevalent in Zechariah. And most people interpret those 2 guys as representing the law and the prophets. It's seems to be an allusion to Jesus having them go out in pairs of 2, because these are guys proclaiming things.
Or even the spies in Exodus. Not the 12, the 2.
Yeah, going into
Joshua and Caleb, yeah.
Okay, into the land. So I like it because these guys, their words are fire, and I like to think that when we're prophesying for the Lord, that that's what's actually coming out of our mouths to great effect. And they get killed.
Are you saying you like this because it's an awesome visual?
I do.
Okay, cool. Just wanted to go there for a second. Okay.
In my weird world, I think of the whole church as the 2 witnesses. And whenever we do something for God verbally, that's what is happening in the hidden spiritual realm, or in reality, another way to put it. But if you proclaim, then you will be persecuted. That's sort of our central thesis, right? And if you're persecuted, it's going to be rough, and you'll cry out to God, and then God will respond, which is really chapters 8 through 11 with punishment, and then there'll be a Perusia. He'll come and win the battle, which he does with the 2 witnesses.
We should define the word Perusia because I had to go look it up.
His coming. So I just needed a P. But
Yep.
After the big battle, after Armageddon, Jesus comes and conquers.
Yeah, Perusia is a Greek word meaning advent or arrival. So I had to look it up because I didn't know what it meant. So
I thought
it
you
means
knew
arrival.
everything. I'm surprised.
What?
Yeah.
I don't actually speak ancient Greek as a native language. So
Could the 2 witnesses be the fullness of the Jews and the fullness of the Gentiles?
yeah, the question is, could the 2 witnesses be the Jews and the Gentiles? Yeah, quite possibly. The idea is that they kind of represent 2 halves of a whole of something.
Yeah.
That's a metaphor for a message God is sending out that gets a very strong reaction. But that message goes out with authority. They have the authority to strike the earth with plagues as often as they like, which seems an odd superpower. Like if you got like a superpower from God, like I would have gone like flying or something cool, but like plagues. Okay, cool.
Something about setting enemies on fire.
Yeah, I mean that sounds
In,
overly dramatic too. But I'm not a set enemies on fire
Myanmar,
kind of guy.
let me tell you-
So
Yeah.
this is all Alex's fault if somebody
Let me
catches
tell you
on
a quick
fire.
story. So we were training church planters in Myanmar. And these guys were trained and sent to villages that had no churches in them. They just had a Buddhist temple. And how do you think the Buddhist priests felt about these Christians coming in to start a church in these villages? So they had one Buddhist guy. They poisoned the pastor and his wife, and they died. But somehow or another, they still survived. So they died briefly and recovered. And this was, I heard this story the last time I was there, which was in 2019. So it would have been 2018 or 17. Yeah, I talked to the guy. And so, oh wait, I'm mixing stories. Okay, that's one story. Second story. Yeah, they died, but they were prayed for and they came back. Second story is another couple went to a village. They were treated very harshly and persecuted and beaten, and they were told they had to leave. They had to leave the village. And they said, we're not leaving because God told us to come here. And they said, you are leaving. And they said, fine, we're leaving, but we're putting a curse on all of your livestock. So they left, and the cattle started dying in this village. So then they found this couple and asked them to come back again. and now there's a church in that village. Now, does that sort of sound like this kind of stuff to you?
Because what happened when Samuel, allowed Saul to become king, it says that, because you disobeyed, you wanted a king rather than God, and he called down, thunder and lightning, and the wheat crop was destroyed.
Yeah, this is stuff the prophets do. Yeah, and if it's the law and the prophets, and which, by the way, the Jews represent the law, and everybody since then, from Elijah forward, represents the prophets, and John the Baptist was Elijah, if you can follow that. So the metaphors all apply. It's just this isn't the kind of Christianity we're used to, is all I'm saying. But it might be more real than we're aware of, and if we can step into it, and for me, part of that means if I'm going to proclaim, don't be surprised if it gets hard, if something gets hard. And if I do that, and if I persevere, don't be surprised if the victory is won, if the Perusia takes place, because that's the cycle. And that's how churches are planted. That's how we make progress with our loved ones. This is, and I told you at the beginning, this has altered my understanding of how the kingdom of God works. I like to do deliverances for people. About once a week, there's a rotating group of us that pray for people with their demonic attachments. And when I see smoke rising out of the abyss with grasshopper-like creatures tormenting people, I'm like, that's what's happening to people. But the thing is we part of the proclamation is it's so easy to free people from demonic attachments because we have the authority to do it. So I think the weirder the Christian is, the more they get revelation. And the weirder Christians are, sometimes they're weird just because they're weird, and it has nothing to do with godliness, But the Christians who live like this, and when I travel overseas, I feel like this makes a whole lot more sense than, and so when I come back, I'm thinking, I actually want to take this more seriously because I think this is how it actually works. Somebody over there have a question? All right, did you have one? Okay. Let's fast track because we're going to run out of time.
We should also mention the year 3.5 years shows up a lot as half of 7. So the idea is that God's doing a thing, and then something happens and it gets interrupted, and then it continues on to completion, right? So you get a lot of 3.5, and then something,
Yeah.
and then 3.5.
This section is ripe with 3.5 imagery, right in the middle of the whole book. And all of them indicate progress, counterattack, perseverance, and then victory. And so the halfway point is where things get hard. And so I recommend not quitting when things get hard. The seventh angel.
We should also point out the first century church was not known for its temporal power, right? These are not people that are sitting on the top of society. These are the downtrodden. Right? So the idea that God is fighting actively and granting power in their world to help them in their daily struggle against, life is a very powerful idea, right? And would have been very relevant to what they were going through.
Yeah. Seventh trumpet is an angel, and we're now in chapter 11. Verse 15.
The other thing we should mention in this book is the power is released as part of the work of God, not as people just like doing it for fun. It's not a spell. It's not a thing that God just like, oh, you're going to do this. Like it's always central to what God is trying to accomplish, that you get used in one of these ways, not that it's about you, right? The power doesn't originate from us. It's a God thing.
Good. Seventh trumpet takes us into another scene like we saw in chapter 7 with a bunch of worshiping people. So the repetition here is all hell is breaking loose. Persevere to the end. Jesus comes and rescues, and then you're worshiping. And that's our final state. We have it again in the end of chapter 11. People just worshiping. Everything is resolved. I don't know if this is the third woe, because verse 14 says the third woe is coming soon, and then suddenly we see a scene in heaven. Maybe that's the martyrs again. But That's why they think this is the ending of the telling of the story once again, because we're back in heaven with complete resolution. But it all ends really good. And the world is a rough place. And so I don't think the stuff we're reading about, if it's a picture of stuff that's happening in general. I mean, I read the newspaper, and there's always something about another murder in Aurora, for example. Aurora just is not the place to live right now. Or where we lived in Pueblo for a while, there's just rough stuff. Or you look at the epidemic of fentanyl or methamphetamines, and the world is there's actually a war going on, and to me, this is a description of it. And including that it'll all be okay in the end. So, all right, let's talk about.
We should go on to something cheerier,
Yeah,
which
how
is
about we
the
talk
Black
about
Death.
the bubonic plague?
Yeah, the
That'd be
bubonic
great.
plague, which you can still get in Colorado, actually. Don't worry, it responds very well to modern antibiotics. So the end of the world moment I wanted to talk about this week is what's known as the Plague of Justinian.
Page 51.
Page 51, and it happened in the Byzantine Empire. So Rome, at this point, had been fallen for about 90 years. The western half, the Roman Empire had splintered into two pieces, and the eastern half would survive another 1,000 years, or another 900 years. But the western half at this point had fallen to the barbarians. The Vandals and the Ostrogoths and all the other barbarian tribes had basically taken over the western half of the empire. This is the end of the world moment. The question is, what are we talking about? This is not in the text. This is not in the book of Revelation. This is just,
This
it's
is
in
where
the packet,
thought,
we should
Christians
say.
thought the world was ending at different times. And
I wouldn't go that far, but
this is Revelation according to the contemporaries of Justinian,
so Justinian was
who were going through a bubonic
Justinian
plague.
was the emperor of the Byzantine Empire in the year 541, and there was a horrible, horrible plague that was unleashed on the Byzantine Empire in 541. It turns out it was a worldwide plague. It was humanity's first experience with the Black Death, the bubonic plague, which is caused by a little bacteria that lives on fleas that live on rats. And so or prairie dogs, yes, good point, good prairie dogs. Around here you can get Black Death from a prairie dog. We're going to basically make it so that nobody ever moves to Colorado ever again.
Don't worry about prairie dogs, worry about fleas.
So in the year of 541, basically this plague hit, and the reason we know so much about it is the bishop of Ephesus, John, wrote down the contemporary account, and we'll provide a link, I think, in the links to the historic notes, but this was a time when half of the Byzantine Empire dropped dead. So not just a third, half, right? Now, modern scholarship indicates it may not have been quite that high, but it was horrible. Like, the people that were experiencing this were like, clearly this is it, right? We are cashing in the chips. God's coming, like, gone. And it wasn't. The crazy thing about it was somehow the Byzantine Empire survived another 900 years. And it's not really an error they fell into so much as a common way of thinking about stuff, which is they had kind of over-spiritualized the plague, right? We're not saying that God doesn't send plagues as judgments, but this was not one of them, right? It's the contemporary people at the time attributed it must have been something we did. Clearly we were all wrong. And they did use that instance to right some of the wrongs of their society, so there was good that came out of it. But it was caused by a bacteria, right? It was not whether or not God sent it, I don't know and can't claim. But the fallout from it was good stuff, and the people expecting the world to end were in fact wrong. Now, they weren't necessarily wrong about God sending it. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. I make no claim either way. But what they were wrong about was the world didn't end there, right? And part of the error they fell into was doomerism. This idea, we can't go on, that's it, right? And hopelessness is its own kind of thinking that you can kind of very easily fall into when you start looking at that.
Doomerism?
Doomerism.
Like you're really into doom and gloom kind of
Yeah,
thing?
doomerism. It's got symptoms like doom scrolling and a bunch of other things that have the word doom in them, so it seems kind of relevant for today. But again, this was a thing that we know about from contemporary sources. Eventually, another plague, also bubonic, would hit in 1347, and a third of Europe dropped dead. And everybody was flipping out again, going, clearly this is the end of the world, right? And it's very easy in times of mass societal disruption to look at what's going on around you and go, there's no way we get out of this. This is it, right? It's a very natural thing to think. I know, all of us, having all lived through COVID, it's plagues are a real thing, right? And what I wanted to talk about was the suffering of the people we're experiencing either in the Byzantine Empire or in the Black Death wasn't the end. It wasn't the end of the story, right? And it's easy to look at that and go, clearly that's the end of the story. And somehow or other, these societies came back in ways that were forever altered and changed, but they did come back, right?
Okay.
There's another, one of the interesting side notes, there's another big outbreak of the Black Death in 1640-ish, and it was sweeping through southern Germany at the time. And there's a town in southern Germany called Oberammergau, and they made a prayer to God. The elders of the village all got together and they prayed, and they said, if we're spared from the plague, we will put on the Passion Play for you. And they did. They prayed. They were deeply Catholic, and they prayed to the heavenly bodies, Virgin Mary and everybody else they could think of, to please spare the town, and we'll put on a play. They have been performing that Passion Play every 10 years for 400 years, still faithfully. I saw it. I saw it in 2010 when I was living in Germany. It is wild. It is 6 hours long, all in German, which I do not actually speak. They have a handy English guide. It is an unreal experience. It is absolutely it's wild. You should definitely go see it. If you're in Germany, you need to make reservations 2 years in advance. And it's this entire village. To be in this Passionspiel, you have to be a part of the village. And they perform it every 10 years, and they have 600 people. The entire village empties out for 6 hours every day for a whole summer to put on this play. So it's wild.
Okay. All right. So when calamities strike, is that descriptive of what we're reading, or is it simply natural causes? Are horrible things like plagues a part of God's punishment, response to the prayers of God people in order to soften people to have a love relationship with God? These are the kind of questions that you can ask in all this. And I don't think they're easy questions to answer. But I do know that if I'm living in that village or whatever, if I'm living through a plague, I will cry out to God, and maybe we'll be spared. And maybe we won't be. We might, but we'll be spared when we're wearing our white robes and waving our palm branches.
The end is sure, the path is not.
Yeah. All right. Well, we've got about 10 minutes to share something about Roman culture.
I wanted to talk a little bit this week in your ancient world sort of background reading about Roman religion and generally ancient world ideas about religion. So, how many of us have ever heard the phrase, "I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious"? Pretty much everybody, right? Okay. So the Romans would have flipped that on its head. Oh, I'm religious, but I'm not spiritual, right? The conception of religion in the ancient world was very much one of outer form. One of Jesus' huge innovations in the grand scheme of ethical teaching and humanity is this idea that the inner form matters more than the outer form, right? This is a huge deal in Christianity. Romans were really into the outer form, right? So the chief duty of a temple, and temples were generally funded by the state, was to do the ritual perfectly and consistently. That was the important thing to keep that sphere of human, whatever that god or goddess had authority over, to keep that sphere running along swimmingly. That ritual needed to be performed at very specific times. New moons, solar days, whatever. The idea was that the ritual bound sort of the worshiper and the god would then look with favor on the worshipers would get special, whatever that thing you needed was. Vast majority of the ancient world, not in the Near East, but everywhere else, were pantheists, right? So you believe in many, many gods, possibly not all even from the same tradition. So you might believe in Jupiter and Apollo from the Greco-Roman tradition. You might also be a member of the cult of Isis from the Egyptian tradition. You might have picked up some Zoroastrianism along the way. Like, the amount of religions is crazy. There's temples everywhere, right? But again, it's all about the outer form of the religion being necessary to keep the wheels kind of greased in terms of that sphere of life. So when you say religion, agnosticism is really common in the Roman Empire because there's so many religions and so many competing truth claims, right? They're like, whatever. Paul walks into Athens, and what does he see? He says, what's the extra altar they built? It's to the unknown God, just in case they missed one. They're like, we're going to build an extra just in case. We never know. You don't want to offend anybody. The relationship between the heavens and the earth is also a little interesting. There's a big axiom in Greek philosophy, as above, so below. In other words, whatever's happening in heaven, those events are reflected on earth. Christianity flips that around. When Jesus talks to Peter, he says, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Right? Christians are the ones that flip that around and go, no, the prayers are effective, right? So the thing I wanted to talk about is religion is very much a state civic thing where it was very, very bad to offend any of the gods, and it wasn't really hard not to offend them usually if you're also a pantheist, right? It's only when you get into these exclusive truth claims of the Near East that you wind into trouble. I think we're going to talk about ancestor and emperor worship and the state of Judaism in the Roman Empire a little later. I think that's like next week or the week after. But I did want to mention just quickly, the other thing that's a huge deal religion-wise is divination. The Romans are really into divination. So kill a rabbit, look at its intestines, look at the flocks of birds, look at the sky, look at clouds, look at whatever. And it's because that desire to kind of know what's going on is very basic. Astrology very much was wound up in this pantheon. The names for our planets are still all, predominantly Roman. Divination eventually became a problem in the sense that it became too easy to ignore whatever the imperial orders were because you were like, nope, not doing it. Omens are bad, like not a good idea. So eventually divination became only practicable by people in the imperial kind of family. And that way they were a way of kind of maintaining control so that it didn't get out. Like we're only going to have one interpretation of what the omens are, and it's going to be the official one. So that way you could avoid, because otherwise, go invade that country. Nope, omens are terrible, not doing it. Which, is okay if you don't want to get invaded, but, we should mention also another oddity to a modern hearer is the Roman civic gods had no interest in your soul whatsoever. Roman religion largely did not speak to what happened to you after death. There was an assumption just everybody gets in the big pool. You end up in the underworld. Maybe it's great, maybe it's terrible, don't know. The idea of life after death as the central concern of religion is very much a Near Eastern Judeo-Christian thing. The idea that God would be personally interested in what happened to you after you died is a very Christian, very Jewish idea. And it's even more Christian than Jewish in a lot of ways, or at least Judaism of first century times.
I remember hearing that one of the marks of the early Christians, not only would they rescue babies that were put out by the Romans or the Egyptians, but they would bury people's dead.
Bury the dead, yep.
Because they believed that what happened to you after you died was central. And so it showed love to people who had lost a relative, and everyone's like, well, who cares? And the Christians would come and they would honor the dead through burial. There's
a quote from a historian I'm going to butcher because I don't really remember it right, but he basically said, one reason Christianity took over the Roman Empire in 300 years was that on average, Christians lived better, ate better, and died better than anybody else around them, right, on average. And they were very kind, they were very concerned with the poor. And that idea of religion as a thing that speaks to what happens after this life is a big deal. This entire concept that God would care enough about his followers on earth turn back the curtain and show them what's going on in heaven as a direct result of what's going on to them on earth is unheard of. God cares that much about people? Why? None of the other gods seem to, right? There is one exception to this, which is the mystery cults. So one of the other forces in Roman religion that kind of speaks against this is the idea of a mystery cult. Mystery cults are huge. In some sense, they are very much still with us. This is the part of Roman religion that survived the most. Not too many people worship Zeus or Apollo anymore. It's not a very popular pantheon, I guess, but a lot of people are in what effectively are mystery cults, right?
Even today.
Even today, yep. The hallmark of a mystery cult is it has a mystery. What's a mystery? A mystery is esoteric secret knowledge that saves you. So it's very much tied up in Gnosticism and this idea we talked about last week of, oh, what you need in your life isn't Jesus. It's Jesus plus extra special secret knowledge. That knowledge, that gnosis, is very much a thing mystery cults are offering. They're offering you a way to partake in a more direct way with a divine entity by getting initiated into the special rites. What's different is Christianity does all this out in the open. Paul talks about we have a mystery revealed, right? Christianity did all this publicly. There's no extra club Alex and I are in. At least I'm not. I don't know. Maybe you are. They're not in. Okay. There's no club, as far as I know, that anybody's in. Maybe I'm just not cool enough. I don't know. It's a good point. But the idea is that there isn't one set of Christian beliefs for the outer plebes, the sheeple, and then there's another separate set of beliefs for those who are in the know. You know what I mean? And then there's probably another set of beliefs on top of that, right? If you had wanted to set up Christianity as a mystery cult, you wouldn't have started with Jesus as God. You would have kind of worked your way up to that 3 or 4 rings in of going like, great teacher, great guy, and then you would have gotten into the inner ring and you would have been like, actually, he was God. Wait, what? Like, why didn't anybody explain this mystery to me like back, 3 initiation rites ago?
So each of these, this is what the early Jesus followers are encountering when they're in Rome, and this is what Paul's dealing with. And it took a couple hundred years, but eventually the empire becomes primarily Jesus following and monotheistic.
Yeah, and different parts of the empire go at different times.
Yeah.
There was definitely an attempt to fuse Christianity and mystery cults. We talked a little bit about Manichaeanism is an early heresy. It's actually still around as a religion in Iran somewhere. There are Gnostic mystery cult Christians that are still kind of around. The guy who founded it was a priest of a mystery cult. And he walks into Christianity and goes, you guys don't know anything about how to set up a proper mystery cult. It's all out in the open. What are you doing? So... yeah, don't join a mystery cult, I guess, is the best advice for your...
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't want to go with... The question is, what about the Masons? Yeah, I think more of a jokel.
Well, there's lots of groups that have secret knowledge.
There are groups that have... there are groups that have secret rites. There are groups that have secret teachings. Whether or not they make a truth claim to that, I don't want to go there, but...
Did you say Waco? Yeah, that was a mystery cult.
Yeah, no, that was actually just a plain old cult, too. I mean, we have a lot of those as well,
Right.
so...
All right, so we're going to wrap up. Thank you. I do want to say before we break into prayer that next week is my favorite section of Revelation, chapters 12 through 14, and it's a beautiful telling of this story in incredible visuals. So I've been looking forward to 12 through 14 since we started. So we're going to break into groups of 3, so do that quickly before you leave. We have about 10 minutes. And the thing you're praying about is the theme is supposed to be persecution this week. And share how you have felt attacked, either by people or demonically in life. And how does that relate to your proclamation of Jesus, spoken or unspoken? So just share hard times you've had. If you feel like you're proclaiming, if you feel like you've suffered for it, and pray for each other, and then call it a night. Break into 3s-ish. Thanks.